Welcome back, DPReview TV viewers. Chris Nichols here. We just got our hands on a brand new Sony ZV-1. Now, this is a dedicated vlogging camera. Now, I know that Canon tried to do this a little bit with their G7X3, but it wasn't quite a true vlogging camera. There's some compromises, but this really is. And the first thing that tells me that is that Sony has dropped the Cybershot moniker. The second thing that tells me that is this is not a Sony DSC ZV-1. This is a Sony DC. And the DSC always stood for digital stills camera. But don't worry, it does take photos. Now, we just got this camera moments ago, and the embargo is only hours from now, okay? So we thought rather than give you a full hands-on impression or whatever today, we're gonna talk about some of the things that you might have missed about this camera that we think are significant. Check out DPReview.com. We've got a great article going up at launch with all the specs, and we will have a more full-featured video for you on this camera very shortly. But let's get started on what you might not know about the ZV-1. So of course we're going vlog style here on a vlogging camera. Now, this clip and the intro are being shot with the internal microphones built into the Sony. Now they're facing me, and hopefully I sound really good right now, but one thing that we want to keep in mind is because they are forward facing, what happens if I want to narrate? Well, I point the camera at something else. In this particular case, you be the judge, let me know if it's picking up my voice properly. Of course, you do have a hot shoe on here and a mic port, so you could always add a Lav Mic, or, you know, if you do want to narrate from behind the camera, put a shotgun microphone on there and just having it pointing backwards towards your face. That'll probably work really, really well. The other thing that I want to mention is that there is a dead cat for the top of these microphones because they will be prone to wind noise, but it does take up the hot shoe slot. So if you want to use those internal microphones, you're not going to be able to easily attach anything else unless maybe you go with an adapter through the tripod socket. Last thing to point out, that hot shoe does work with Sony's active interface accessories, so you might be able to use the XLR adapter, and you can certainly use a lot of their powered microphones. Now, a lot of people are saying this camera is going to suck for photos, and they think that the RX100 5A would be a better option. It certainly does give you an EVF and a control ring, but we don't necessarily agree with that because a lot of people out there will be a more casual user. They want to do the vlogging style thing, but they also want to get some nice shots and not worry too much about manual control. This camera gives you Sony's awesome real-time tracking autofocus, something the RX100 5A does not have. And so even though you might not get the same creative control, you're probably going to get a much higher success rate getting shots in focus. For the casual user, that might be exactly what you're looking for. Okay, so now I'm on a Lav microphone, and this is to illustrate a couple things. First off, that we do have a mic jack, which is great, but the second thing is we don't have a headphone jack, and actually, this is a problem. Now you might say, well, it's a vlogging camera, Chris, why do I need headphones? I'm not gonna wear earphones while I'm doing my vlogs, but think about this. I'm using a Lav microphone right now, and maybe I'm getting shirt noise, or I'm getting wind noise, or interference, and I don't know that because I can't hear it. So what I would do is record a clip and then play it back and listen to it, make sure the audio is okay. But without a headphone jack, I'm reliant on the built-in speakers on the Sony, and frankly, they're not very good. So we do wish we had a headphone jack so we could at least monitor that audio properly and make sure everything's okay before we move on to the next clip. And I know what you're thinking, what about the USB port? Unfortunately, it doesn't support headphones. Now here's something you might not know. This camera can only record 5 minutes of video in 4K. Well, of course, only by default. You can thankfully turn that off and then actually record an unlimited amount of time, which is awesome, but you are gonna wanna turn that off. Now, unfortunately, is this camera gonna overheat and turn into a flaming meteorite that melts your batteries and burns your hands? We don't know that yet. We're gonna wanna test that out, but I think you'll be okay. One thing we do know though, battery life is not stellar on these cameras. Luckily, you can power them off of a USB power bank. Okay, so something that you might already know, Sony doesn't quite have the best reputation when it comes to color science and skin tones. They often get a bit of a bad rap for that. And of course, it is highly subjective. However, something you might not know is that the Sony ZV-1 now has a tweaked standard profile. We've shot the entire video using this profile. It is pretty flat gray light, but Sony promises way better skin tones using this standard profile. So you guys be the judge. You do still get all the other profiles that you're used to with a Sony camera, but this is a nice feature and we're definitely going to test this in depth. All right, so now you can see that I'm walking on this old dirt path to illustrate the optical image stabilization on this camera. It is basically an identical lens-based system to the other RX100 cameras. However, it's doing an okay job, but it's a little bit bumpy. Let's try something else. All right, now we are using Sony's active steady shot mode. This is both digital and optical image stabilization turned on, and it probably looks quite a bit smoother. I hope so. You be the judge. Now you might say, well, if it's better, why not always use it? There are some issues. First off, digital image stabilization is going to crop your video tighter, and a lot of the hardcore vloggers looking at this camera have already been saying 24mm wide angle on this lens isn't wide enough. We want wider. This digital stabilization is going to be a problem. Now, another interesting feature to keep in mind, though, is that if you turn it off, Sony still does remember all of the gyroscopic measurements and movements, so you can always turn it on later using Sony's Image Edge software, and then you can decide whether you need it or not. That is a nice benefit. So hopefully we enlightened you on some things you might not have known about the ZV-1. This camera has a lot of features, so as I say, we're going to do a full look at this camera very, very shortly. Thanks so much for joining us. Check out Instagram, Twitter. Please subscribe to the channel. We'll see you guys soon.